Hey, it's time for Hands on Mac. Today we're going to delve into the command line. Hands on Mac is brought to you from Twit's LastPass Studios. You're focused on security, but are your employees? LastPass can ensure they are by making access and authentication seamless, whether they're working in the office or remote. Visit lastpass.com/twit to learn more.
This is Twit.
Hands on Mac is brought to you by IT Pro TV. Visit itpro.tv/twit and use the code TWIT30 for an additional 30% off for the lifetime of your active subscription. Hey everybody, welcome to Hands on Mac. I'm Leo Laporte, Mac lover since 1984. One of the reasons I love the Mac is because it is a version of Unix, the mothership of operating systems. Macintosh's operating system is based on BSD, the Berkeley Systems distribution. And even more to the point than all of that, where it came from or what it is the fact that you have a Unix-style command line available to you at all times on the Macintosh, and you can install Unix-style tools. So for the next few episodes, we're going to talk about that and how to use the command line, how to install those tools using a system called Homebrew, and then even in a couple of episodes, how to set up your system automatically or almost automatically using Homebrew and some of its features. But let's first start with the terminal. I showed you last week the terminal program I use and recommend, iTerm2. You can see I've got it up here on the screen. And we're gonna work here in the command line, so let's talk a little bit about it. When you get a Macintosh, you get a terminal. I've replaced it with a third-party terminal, iTerm2. You also get a command line environment, a shell, as we call it. The original Mac shell was for years something called Bash, the born-again shell, which is a very common shell. It's often used on Linux as well. Apple, in the most recent version of Mac OS Catalina, has replaced that with Z shell, which is a little bit more modern. I use another shell entirely called Fish, which is even more modern. But none of that's going to matter because the simple commands I'm going to show you today will work on any of the above. It will affect, though, what your prompt looks like. And as you can see, I've opted for a simple Fish prompt that shows me, and I'll zoom in on this so you can see it, what directory I'm in. That's this little tilde. And then the $sign says, okay, type something here. And then, of course, there's the caret saying this is where your typing will go. Let's talk first about directories. Directories are just like folders. You have, in fact, they show up, folders show up as part of your directories in the command line. If I ask it, what's my current working directory, or PWD, you'll see that I'm in the folder /users/Leo. That front slash means it's the very top level directory. And if you open your Macintosh Explorer, you'll see the Finder. You'll see, oh yeah, there's users. And then inside users, each user has its own directory. In this case, I'm in the Leo directory. So that's my home directory. And a shortcut for home is this little tilde. In fact, I could even say, let's say I want to go to a directory called documents. I could say tilde/documents. Whoops. And there it is. That's the actual directory. That tilde is expanded by the shell into /users/Leo. So that's the first thing to understand. And now I'm in the documents folder. I actually didn't want to be. So let's go back to our home directory. And that's a simple command, cd for change directory. If you type cd and a directory name, it'll go to that directory. Let's say I go cd tilde/desktop. And now I'll be in the directory called desktop, you see. But if I just type cd without anything, I'll go right back home. So that's a first shortcut to know and use. CD moves you around in directories. Remember, directories are the same thing as folders. And you can go into a deep level, if / as deep as you want. But you can always come back to the home directory, the top level directory, by typing cd. Want to know what's in the directory? Well, on Windows, you use the dir command. In Unix, like operating systems, you use the ls command. Think of it as short for list. One of the things about Unix I should probably explain before we go much further, is the whole kind of ethos of Linux and Unix in general is simple programs that do one thing well. And the operating system is constructed in such a way that you can daisy chain programs using what they call a pipe, so you can get the output of one program to go into the input of another program with a pipe command, and then the output of that into another one. So the idea of Unix is simple, short commands, simple utilities that do one thing well, and then the ability to daisy chain them to do more elaborate things. So that's a good thing to understand before we go much further, because that is kind of key to the whole operation here. ls, and I'm going to zoom out because it's going to spit out a lot of text here. ls lists the files in a directory. Ready? Woo, there they are. Now, that's a pretty simple listing. I don't get much information about those files. It's just the directories and their file names. I can get more information by using switches. Commands can be followed by subcommands, usually preceded by a dash, although some programs use a double dash. In this case, one of the most common is -a. So I'm saying, let's get a command listing, but I want it for all the files in the directory. That's going to be a longer listing that's going to show hidden files. On Mac OS and other Unix-like operating systems, files that have the name preceded by a period are not usually shown. So you can see I have a bunch of directories and files here, but if I do ls-a, it's going to show you more. It's going to show you the ones that begin with periods as well as all of those other directories. These are hidden files that won't show up normally either in Macintosh Finder or on the command line. There's also ls-l, which is short for long, and that's going to give me much more information about the file. This is actually probably a useful thing to look at because it's going to tell you a little bit about how Unix operating systems work. We see we have the applications folder. That's, yep, the Mac applications folder. We see its creation or modification date. In this case, it's the creation date of the folder. We see its size. We see who owns it. Now, this is an interesting kind of additional piece of information. Unix, Mac OS being a Unix, is a multi-user system. So every user has not only the name of the user, but also the group they're a member of. In this case, I'm Leo, the user, and I am a member of the staff group. You're usually members of many groups. Staff is a group name used by Mac OS. That's useful later because you can assign permissions to access folders to both the individual, the user, and the group the user is in. These are the permissions themselves. This is where it gets a little weird, wonky, and complicated. This is a directory. That's what the D means. And in this directory, the user, that's the first three letters. You see there's three sets of three letters. The first is the user, then the group the user's in, and then everyone else. So in this case, the group and the everyone else have no access at all to this folder, but I have access to read it, write it, and execute it. Now you might say, well, how do you execute a folder? You don't, but to get a listing, you have to have execute permissions. So that's why I have execute permissions. This folder, the audio folder, has more extended permissions. The group can execute, in other words, list it and read it, but they can't write to it. There's no W there. This gets a little complicated. I'm not sure I want to get too far down this road, but it will lead us to the next command, which is chmod. This is where you change permissions. Now, this is useful for two reasons. Sometimes we want to reduce the permissions for security purposes. For instance, if you have a GPG, the encryption technology, or SSH, the secure shell technology, you want to restrict who can access those folders, who can list them, who can execute files in them, who can read them, and who can write them. Because for security reasons, you don't want the world to be able to see everything you're doing in your GPG keys, your encryption keys, or your SSH keys. So it's very important to set those permissions properly. Now, setting permissions, there's two ways to do it with the chmod command. You can either add, so let's say I'm going to change that applications folder. So I'm going to type applications, and I want to change this permission to say that the user can't execute it. So I'm going to user -x. Oops, I did it in the wrong order though. Let's do it in the right order. So first we do u -x, and then we do applications. Notice that fish and most shells are doing auto completion. When I type the first few letters of applications, it actually offers me what it thinks is the right choice, and I just press tab, saves me some typing. So now let's go back and do a ls long and look at applications. And I should have, yes, I did. I took away the X permissions. So now if I try to list applications, it'll say, no, you don't have permission. Let's fix that right now because I want to be able to list my applications. So again, chmod, and I'm going to say, instead of u, notice this, it remembers the last time I typed a command, and I'm going to change that to plus. These are shown, you can also be doing this in hexadecimal. So the X is the 1-bit, the W is the 2-bit, and the R is the 4-bit. So it's possible to do the same thing with numbers. In fact, you can set the whole directory with 3 hexadecimal numbers. 777 would give it all permissions. Watch, I'll do that. chmod 777 applications. Now we'll do an ls long. Take a look at the applications, and you see I've turned on all permissions for applications. You probably don't want it set like that, so maybe we'll go back to the way it was, which is chmod. Remember, I had all permissions for the user, 7, but I didn't have any permissions for the group or the world. That would be 700. Does that make sense? And now we'll do an ls-l. And if I go back, I've set it back to the way it was. So what we're seeing here, which is rwx blank, 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 is the same as 700. All right, here's an exercise. How would I show this? So there's a 7 in the first position. The second position, r-x, there's a 1 that plus 0 plus 4, that's a 5. Same thing here. So this setting is 755. If I did chmod 755, that would change applications to the audio setting, etc., etc. You might say, how do I remember all of this? Well, that leads us to a really useful command, man. That's the man pages. And almost all Unix commands have man pages generated when you install the tool. In this case, if I type man chmod, that's going to get the manual for the command. It's a little cryptic. These are the switches, -F, H, V, -R, -L, all of these, and then the file name. So if, for instance, I typed, as I first did, typed it backwards and said, what the heck happened? I did it wrong. I put the file name first, not last. Oh, yeah. I can go back and do the manual. This explains what it does. It shows what all the switches are. And it uses a pager, which means it's only going to show the first page. And then if I press spacebar, it'll show the next page. If I press B, it'll go back to the first page. And if I press Q, it exits out. So those are very handy ways to look at the manual pages for the commands you want. So we've learned ls. We've learned CD, we've learned man. There are many, many more commands available to you. I could go on and on and on, but it's handy to know at least that many. And the man command is the most useful command. If at any time you don't know how something works, having the man command is the key to understanding it. There's one more tool that I have installed, and I'll show you real quickly. This is a tease for next week. I use Brew to install programs. I'll show you how to do this. It's called tldr, and it's a very useful command for finding. First, Brew is going to update itself, look at all the sources, make sure it has the latest versions of all the files. That's the updating. And then it's going to, if I don't have TLDR installed here, it's going to install it. TLDR is a man command that just does, as you would expect from the name, too long, didn't read, just does a few simple, useful tools for you. Now I've installed TLDR after a bit of churning. You'll get used to all this stuff that's spit out, by the way, by terminals. And in the long run, you ignore a lot of it, but eventually you'll find it's useful. It's telling you something. Let's try TLDR for the chmod command. And you'll like the results of this because it's just going to be very simple. This is just the basics you need to know. Chmod changes the access permissions of a file or directory, and then it even gives you some sample commands. We already learned this one. U plus X, give the user who owns a file the right to execute it. U plus read write, and that's really handy. So TLDR is a nice little command. I'll show you what brew is and how I installed this a little bit later. So some of the commands are pretty obscure. In fact, Apple has a whole bunch of other tools that you can use. I'll give you just as an example, and it'll teach us one more important thing to understand about the command line. The command line, when you use it, you're operating as yourself, as the user. But there may be times when you want to operate as an administrator. And to operate as an administrator, there's two ways to do it. One, you could log in as the root user. Use the command su superuser do. Sudo is a predicate to any other command that you want to use. So it'll ask me for the superuser password. Actually, it asks me for my password. And if I have administrator rights, I'll be able to execute it. This is a good example. Software update is a command that Apple gives you. It's not on all Unix machines. I'm going to update my system with this command. It's now asking me for my user password. And if I'm in the list of super users, or people who are allowed to do this, I'll be able to execute the command. This is a security procedure, which is really great. Super users can do everything, including erase the whole drive. If I type rm, which is remove, dash rf, which means recursive, and force, and the wildcard star, which means all files, this will delete everything from my hard drive. This is a very dangerous command, and you shouldn't be able to execute this unless you're the super user. So I'm going to leave this out. I won't hit return because I don't want to take any chances. Here's a useful command that Apple gives you. It's a command to change the NVRAM. The non-volatile RAM is where Apple stores a bunch of information about the system. Normally, you don't modify it, but you can from the command line. And here's a really useful tool. I'm going to show you one of the commands, which is StartupMute. Capitalization is important here. Equals %00. Modern Macintosh computers don't have the bong that you start up with. Bong. And I think a lot of us want to have that bong. So if you have a modern Mac laptop and you want the startup bong to come back, this is the command you'd use. It says, notice the command is StartupMute. It says StartupMute equals, and in this case, false. All right? I think I typed a double equals. Let me change that. Equals 00. That's going to turn off the StartupMute. By the way, notice I didn't have to type my password again. The password is remembered for about 15 minutes. So if you execute sequential sudo commands after the first one, you won't have to enter it again for a little while. Now, to turn it back on, what do you think? NVRAM, that's the command. This is the parameter. Notice there's no dash. That's how Apple does it. StartupMute equals, how would we make this true? 01. 01 is true, 00 is false. Now I have no bonging sound on my iMac. when I start up. Actually, that's probably the way I want it. You'll see Apple has a whole bunch of commands like software update and NVRAM that are unique to the Apple operating system. And many of these are only accessible to the command line. So a lot of times you'll see I'm going to change kind of fundamental ways that the Apple Macintosh OS works. You can't do it in a GUI. You can't do it in the startup preference pane. You can only, or the preference pane, system preference pane, you can only do it with a command line. So it's good to know some command lines. We'll talk more about Fish, my favorite shell, at later times. And I'm going to show you Brew next week, which is something everybody who uses the Mac command line should have on their Macintosh. It's an easy way to add additional Unix commands and really make your Mac sing. All right, a little tour of the command line. It's worth spending some time with it. Remember that man command, and there are also plenty of tutorials online that'll give you lots of different commands you can play with. But those are the basics. Thanks for joining us. Of course, Hands on Mac brought to you by our great friends at IT Pro TV. It's made learning IT and finishing IT certificates possible. Students are able to learn quickly at IT Pro TV. Right now, with everything that's going on in the world with travel restrictions and social distancing and shelter in place, it's never been a better time. Go to itpro.tv/twit. Sign up for the remote learning opportunities that IT Pro TV has to offer. Go to itpro.tv/twit. Use the code TWIT30. You'll get an additional 30% off the lifetime of your active subscription. That's itpro.tv/twit. And don't forget that offer code TWIT30. IT Pro TV. Build or expand your IT career and enjoy the journey. I'm Leo Laporte. Thanks for this little command line adventure. More Hands on Mac next Friday. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.